On this channel, I've garnered a bit of a habit for talking about games that have failed or had a steep decline over time, but at least those games didn't straight up scam their entire player base. In this video, I'm going to be talking about The Day Before and how it became one of the biggest and most notorious scams in gaming history. Before we get to the game itself though, let me just talk about the company behind this absolute masterpiece. Fntastic is a video game developer that was founded in 2015. Its main headquarters were situated in a Russian city called Yakutsk, hopefully I've said that right, and the company would later branch out to Singapore. The game studio was founded by just two people, Eduard Gotovtsev and his brother Asen Gotovtsev. The company's first project was actually a Kickstarter funded game called The Wild 8, which they developed in 2017 after receiving $50,000 in community funding, and surprisingly it received a fairly positive reception. The gameplay took inspiration from action role-playing games like Diablo and Don't Starve, and would have you play as a group of plane crash survivors stranded in Alaska. Although the game had a decent launch and a fairly positive response, Fntastic would end up selling the rights over to the publisher Hypertrain just 9 months after releasing it in early access. And Fntastic's reasoning for this was pretty questionable to say the least, saying, "This decision was very hard for us, but nevertheless, because of internal conflict with partners within the company, we had to sell the project to the publisher, whatever that means. It's just a bit of a coincidence that they chose to do what makes them the most profit with the least amount of effort. But hey, this was their first project, and at least they didn't just straight up abandon it, right?" Well, their next game was released in early access towards the end of 2017 and was called Dead Dozen. The game would take place on an abandoned Soviet research base in Siberia, where each round one of the 12 abandoned survivors randomly became the leader of the ghouls, who has to infect the other players until everyone becomes infected. Survivors could collect weapons, useful items, and various gadgets, while ghouls could infect survivors, break down walls, and use special abilities in battle. So basically, it's a glorified match with infected. And although it sounds at least a little fun in theory, the execution was clearly not there, as unlike The Wild 8, this game would get mostly negative reviews on release, which was partly due to the game's horrific launch, that I'm convinced was the sole reason for it being branded as an FPS horror in the first place. The game was littered with bugs and glitches, had terrible performance issues, and constant crashes. To top it all off, the game would receive barely any new updates after release, and was eventually unsupported entirely just 3 months after the game's early access had launched. But Fntastic, being the absolute angels they are, would promptly make a statement clearing this all up, saying, "Dear friends, it's time to take stock of the development of Dead Dozen, because from today, we stop supporting the game." Why? Let's look at the situation in detail. And then we are shown the most basic looking pie chart I think I've ever seen in my entire life. I genuinely think an image of a brick wall would have added more context on this. Unfortunately, the budget ended by April 1st. I'm convinced that's an April Fool's joke just for a laugh. Of course, we were not able to realize much of what we were planning. There are still small bugs and not enough content. Even if we stayed on the development of this project, we must admit that we could not solve the problem of low online in a short time without changing the core of the game. Now, despite all this, they were astonishingly still able to keep the game available to purchase on Steam for nearly 2 years, with it eventually being removed from Steam in October 2021. Just 1 month after stopping development for Dead Dozen, Fntastic would bless the gaming industry once again with another masterpiece, Radiant 1, which is a mobile game that was also ported to Steam with around half an hour of gameplay. And although this game is incredibly short, it does still have quite positive reviews overall, mainly because of its unique art style and engaging story despite the runtime. So I guess this game kind of gets a pass, but it's not exactly impressive that the only game they've executed fairly well so far has been a mobile game that takes under an hour to beat. A few years later, in early 2021, Fntastic would partner with a publishing company called Mytona, which up to this point had only been putting out mobile games. The result of this partnership would be the announcement of a game called Propnight, which later released in December 2021. And to put it bluntly, it's just a knockoff Dead by Daylight game. So much so that I'm almost certain the only reason props were involved with this game in any way was to avoid a lawsuit. There are tons of clear similarities to Dead by Daylight in this, like there being pipes survivors must fix instead of generators. After downing survivors, killers pick them up and put them on chairs instead of hooks, and even some killers' abilities, sound effects, and just looks would be a complete copy of some Dead Dead by Daylight killers, like the nun that can phase to go quicker being almost a complete replica of the spirit in Dead by Daylight. But because survivors can change into objects mid-chase, I guess that makes it a completely different game. So apart from having quite an uncreative concept, the game would also just have a lot of issues. In classic fantastic game fashion, players would experience a bunch of bugs and glitches, while also receiving long queue times of 10 minutes or longer at launch, and the game also just suffered from some major balancing issues. But despite all this, Propnight would actually garner quite a lot of success early on, with many Dead by Daylight players trying the game out of sheer curiosity, but also anyone that was interested in the day before, which was announced at pretty much the same time, would give it a shot just to see what else the company was working on. Regardless of the reasons though, Propnight would sell almost 200,000 units in just the first month of release, and it's made upwards of $7 million since its launch in 2021. The game was also becoming one of the highest watched games on Twitch at 1.2, with the game even beating out Dead by Daylight in terms of Twitch viewership. So all in all, Propnight may not have been a creative or well-crafted game, but it certainly was still majorly successful, and it's important to keep this prior success and profits in mind for later on. So after going through Fantastic's track record of games over the years, it seems pretty clear the sort of quality to expect from them, and that certainly didn't change with the announcement of the day before. It was first announced in January 2021, and it was first described as being an open world MMO survival set in a post-apocalyptic America overrun by zombies. The announcement trailer quickly garnered major traction due to the game's impressive graphics and gameplay, and the game's style reminded most people of a mix between The Last of Us and The Division. Although a large majority of people kept their expectations low, or were very skeptical of the first announcement due to how overly perfect the gameplay seemed to be, especially for an open world MMO game, a large portion of people did fully buy into the hype. And because of this, the game would start to gather more people's interest during the lead up to its release, a release that wouldn't transpire until much later. To help cash in on the immense hype in the meantime though, Fantastic Studios would continue to release additional trailers, and these trailers would show off even more fake pre-rendered gameplay, with some trailers even copying scenes from other popular game trailers at the time, like Call of Duty Cold War. But they wouldn't just deceive people with their trailers and quote-unquote gameplay, they would also just straight up lie about how good the game was going to be, saying things like how the game would be a real breakthrough for the MMO survival genre, and that they had reinvented everything from the in-game goals to the way we approach the quality of the game mechanics. All this lying and deceitful marketing seemed to work though, because by May 2022, the day before it became the most wishlisted game on Steam, and now players were just eagerly waiting for its release. And as you'd expect from a fantastic game, it didn't exactly have a smooth launch. At first, the game was meant to release on June 21st, 2022, but it was instead pushed back to March 1st, 2023, with their excuse being that they wanted to change their game engine from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5. Then, due to copyright issues in late January, it was delayed once again, this time to November 10th. Apparently, they didn't even apply for the trademark for their own game until 1 year after the first trailer was shown, and in that time, someone else took it. They also apparently got into copyright pursuits with the owner of a calendar app that was also called The Day Before, and this whole situation did seem to cause them a bit of hassle, since the game was actually delisted off Steam for a while because of it. But thankfully, Fantastic were able to win back the ownership of their property name, and most importantly of all, reminded everyone that they've never taken a penny from people, accepted no pre-orders, and have not harmed anyone. Don't really know what any of that has to do with them celebrating over getting their trademark back, but sure. The game was also pushed back once more to December 7th, this time without even giving a reason, which isn't worrying at all. But finally, after no further delays, it actually ended up releasing in early access, which is a bit concerning considering the game was originally planned to have a full release, but still, it was finally released in early access on December 7th, 2023, and the game was about as bad as you'd expect. Firstly, instead of being an open world MMO survival game like the trailers and developers have been conveying this entire time, it instead turned out to be a generic extraction shooter. However, it still had the undeniable charm of a fantastic game, as it suffered from a severe amount of bugs and glitches, atrocious server issues, and inconsistent performance. The game also looked nothing like the trailers. What a shock. Character models and animations were dreadful, zombies were barely even in the game, and the ones that would appear were incredibly spongy, and the voice lines throughout sounded AI generated. So overall, it seemed all in a good day's work for Fantastic. As you'd imagine, the day before got torn to shreds critically, receiving overwhelmingly negative reviews on Steam, and even trusted reviewer IGN gave it a measly 1 out of 10. That's how you know it's bad. After only 4 days of widespread hate, Fantastic would not only announce the closure of the day before, but the closure of their entire studio, with a statement reading, "Today we announce the closure of Fantastic Studio. Unfortunately, the day before has failed financially, and we lack the funds to continue. All income received is being used to pay off debts to our partners." I like how they've given no further details other than that. Yeah, so guys, we're using all that money earned that we haven't disclosed on a debt we haven't said the amount of to our own mystery partners that we won't disclose the names of. It's important to note that we didn't take any money from the public during the development of the day before. There were no pre-orders or crowdfunding campaigns. Although it is true that the game wasn't crowdfunded or profited from any pre-orders since it was released in early access, it's still pretty disingenuous to try and say that they haven't taken any money from people because it's not been during development. What about all the people that paid the $40 for the game at launch? I guess they were using that money for their mysterious partner debts, so it's all good. At the moment, the future of the day before and Propnight is unknown, but the servers will remain operational. We apologize if we didn't meet your expectations, but unfortunately, we miscalculated our capabilities. Ah yes, a miscalculation. They just miscalculated how well those pre-rendered cutscenes would do at building hype. They must have also miscalculated how groundbreaking the game was going to be for a genre of games it didn't even end up being in. I guess these things happen. Creating games is an incredibly challenging endeavor. We are grateful to everyone who supported us during these difficult years. And with that, Fantastic took the day before off Steam, and they went on to make another statement just 11 days later, declaring that the day before and Propnight servers will be shutting down on January 22nd, meaning that the day before will only have been a playable game for a month and a half. Now, blatantly deceiving people with fake trailers and unwarranted hype is one thing, but what makes it even worse is the fact that Fantastic actually doubled down on the fact that they did nothing wrong, to the point where they've tweeted multiple times saying how they aren't scammers and didn't profit from the game. So overall, the day before's launch and Fantastic's response to the backlash was pretty embarrassing. Just a shameless cash grab that took advantage of people's gullibility, and then deflecting with, "Don't worry guys, we don't actually profit from it, so it's all good." Now, a little while ago, I made a similar sort of video talking about Gollum, and like the day before, I talked about how disastrous of a game that was. Now, as atrocious as the Lord of the Rings Gollum turned out, despite the immense backlash it received before and after launch, you'd probably be surprised to find out that it still ended up selling almost 10,000 copies in the first 3 days, which means it generated around $400,000 in that time. Now, this is still terrible sales figures for what's supposed to be an official Lord of the Rings game, but it still makes you wonder, how many units did the day before actually sell? Well, according to multiple sources online, it sold nearly 200,000 units in just 3 days. So with the game being sold for $39.99, and then with Steam's 30% cut per sale, that comes to around $5.6 million in revenue. But you're probably wondering, what about the refunds? Surely they wouldn't have made that much profit due to the amount of people refunding the game, right? Well, there's actually a leak that further confirms the unit sales number I've already got, but also gives us the return stats. So thanks to this Reddit user, Visceral, who reposted this leak, which is basically a screenshot of a message that was intended to be shared with the day before team, but was instead posted on their public Discord. And in this screenshot, it gives us the early sales number for the game, which was 201,076 units, and the refunds equated to 91,694 units, meaning more than half of the people that bought the game didn't actually refund it, at least not near launch. So with that in mind, if we just round refunded units to 100,000 and do the same calculation again, that means they still would have made over $2.8 million in profit. So yeah, going off the game's assets, which were also leaked by the way, and as expected were mostly taken straight from Unreal Engine, it doesn't doesn't look like this game would cost anywhere near $1 million to make, never mind over 2. So I think it's safe to say that the day before might not be the financial failure that Fantastic are saying it is, unless their mysterious partner debts are to the mob. There have been rumors that Fantastic may be changing their company name, probably so they can attempt to do the exact same process all over again. However, they have tweeted out denying these claims. But honestly, would it really be much of a surprise if they were? So as I said at the start of this video, I've talked about some god-awful games on this channel. From games that have been ruined by awful decisions, or sequels that have slimy microtransactions and live service elements, or even just some games that are so bad it's hard to give one redeemable quality for its existence. But rarely do you see a game that is just a full-blown scam with no redeeming qualities in the slightest. From the pre-rendered cutscenes being marketed as gameplay trailers, to the blatant lies about the game and everything surrounding it, and of course, how can we forget the endless excuses from the studio that definitely hasn't made any money from the game. The Day Before is a game that continues to show just how exploitable the gaming industry can be, and hopefully it can help signify to anyone that might fall for stuff like this what to look out for in the future. And maybe it will at least teach some people to wait for how a game is being received before jumping the gun and buying it. And perhaps that is the one redeeming quality of a scam game that will soon be unplayable, being a lesson.